Our speaker this morning is Reed Sheard. He is the Vice President for College Advancement and Chief Information Officer here at Westmont College. Prior to coming to Westmont, Reed served at Spring Arbor University in Michigan as Vice President and CIO for 5 years, and at George Fox University in Oregon as an Assistant Professor of Leadership Studies. Prior to Reed's time in higher education, he worked at General Electric, Apple, Informix Software, and helped start Consonis Inc., which was the fastest growing IT company in Oregon in 1999 and 2000. Reed is also an ordained pastor in the American Baptist churches and has served as an associate pastor in 2 churches. Reed earned his BA from the University of Sioux Falls, a master's degree from Fuller Theological Seminary, and a doctorate in higher education leadership from Seattle University. He lives here in Santa Barbara with his wife Susan and his 2 sons Ben and Cooper, who are in 11th and 9th grade at Providence Hall. Reed loves the Lakers, his family, cool gadgets, collecting pens, and Starbucks, not necessarily in that order. So let's welcome Reed Sheard.
Thanks, Joe. Well, it's good to be here. I'm excited about sharing with you this morning. I've just finished my 2nd year here at Westmont, and I love being at the college. I love what I've been called to do. You know, the privilege of securing the necessary resources to support the mission of the school, to have the wonderful privilege of telling our story widely and throughout the world, and to ensure that technology is being leveraged in ways that extend the reach and the influence of Westmont. It's a great job, and I'm fortunate to have it. But at the end of the day, it's really about you. It's about what God is doing through you and through this place, through all of you as students, and before you know it, soon to be graduates. Right? The nice thing about graduation is there's a huge privilege and a responsibility that awaits you. And I and all of us who serve here at the college can't wait to see what God does through your life. I started working in Christian higher ed in 1997, and as Michelle shared, I've served at 3 institutions, with Westmont being the most recent. Since my job has me external to the college mostly, my interaction with the students has been largely limited to the choir. Thanks to Dr. Schausberger, when we travel, we either have the string quartet, soloists, or the full choir with us, because how can you talk about Westmont without having the students, right? And so they travel with us, and we've been all over the country together, and it's been wonderful to do that. But a little bit about me is I am a person that likes to try to get things done. And I'm this way in my work, and early on I was also this way in my ministry, in my service. I remember marching into the chaplain's office at one of the schools I worked at and informing the chaplain that I was available to speak regularly in chapel. You see, in business, usually the direct route is the best route. And so I used that. Well, after a few months with no invitation forthcoming, I went to a good friend of mine and shared my frustration that I hadn't been asked to speak in chapel. He asked me if I had been felt invited by the Lord to speak at the school. And I confessed, well, I really hadn't thought about it that way. I just thought about it as something that I wanted to do. And so we came up with the idea that using Judges 6 and 7 with Gideon, why don't we put a fleece out and use that fleece to discern when and if you're to speak in chapel. If you remember from Judges 6 and 7, Gideon had the fleece and said, make the fleece wet. And they would wring it out, and there was like a bowl full of water, but around it the ground was dry, to determine if Gideon was indeed going to be used by God to save Israel. And then Gideon asked again, can we reverse that? And the Lord made it so. So on that day in 1998, my friend Tom and I decided that my fleece would be not to ask to speak in chapel, and to wait until I was actually asked, which is very contrary to my nature. But we thought, when asked, we knew it would be of the Lord. Well, this morning, 13 years later, represents the first invitation to speak in chapel. I couldn't be more pumped to be here. If you're going to speak in chapel, you speak in chapel at Westmont. So I was talking to my son, Ben, and he said, one thing, Dad, make sure you have fun this morning. And he said, in case it's 13 years again, make sure you do it for all it's worth. So I'm going to invite Ben up here real quick, and I'd like to, if you would indulge me, I want to do a couple things. First of all, I've got my iPhone out here, and I'd like to just get a picture of Ben and I together. All right? And then all of you that have iPhones, there's probably quite a few out there, or Droids or something, don't you? Go ahead and get a picture of me and your campus pastor. All right? And then I'll thank you. I saw the flash. Very good. Now, one for Facebook and one for my mom and dad, so that'll be good. Thanks, Ben. You're done. Yeah. Well, when I first learned that I was going to be asked to speak in chapel, I quickly asked, well, what's the topic going to be? Could it be Luther and volume 1 of his sermons? It's a wonderful insight into this monk turned reformer, or perhaps it was Julian of Norwich, interpreting the revelations of divine love, published in the 14th century, believed to be the first book in English written by a woman and published. Or Dietrich Bonhoeffer, many of you know of him, the Lutheran pastor who participated in the attempt to assassinate Hitler, even though he was an avowed pacifist. His book, Cost of Discipleship, should be required reading for every Christian. Wonderful figure to talk about. Or H. Richard Niebuhr, Christ and Culture, one of my favorite books. All of us have a worldview on how things really work. Thanks, Brad. And whether we know of our worldview or not, we all have one. And Niebuhr gives us this wonderful structure, this framework to understand how we see and understand how God is involved in the world, and then the ways in which we participate with the Lord's activity. Perhaps it would be on that. Or on J.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings. For about 3 years, I read and did research and wrote a little bit about this theory that Lord of the Rings was to Tolkien what Narnia and the Chronicles of Narnia was to C.S. Lewis. The crowning myth or story that points to the ever-true story of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Or my favorite author of all, Henry Nouwen. And Henry's idea that the Lord's Supper or Eucharist is this rhythm upon which the spiritual life is based. Well, the answer I got back was not quite. The answer I got back that we were going to be talking about the internet this morning. And I said, really, the internet in chapel? How does that work? And Michelle came with this idea, well, the internet is a tool for truth. And that really intrigued me as a possibility. So I'm excited to be here to share my faith with you. And I'm also excited to spend a few minutes talking about that in human history, there's been these moments where people of substance and tools come together in remarkable ways. And I think this is that particular time for you and for us. For example, Martin Luther would have been just one more reformer in a small area had it not been for the printing press. But thanks to the printing press, Martin Luther became the first best-selling author that ever existed. He discovered the power of this tool, and he mastered this new medium and used it to spread and turn what would have been probably just a local affair into an international movement. It was the combination of faithful servant, Martin, and this effective tool that became an impetus for transformation. This is the creative tension I'd like to spend a few minutes talking with you this morning about. An opportunity awaits you. Today we live in a time where the speed and the amount of communication is unparalleled in human history, and we all know it. Something happens in one part of the globe, and literally within minutes we know about it. We've seen it in the volatility of the financial markets, that a disaster or an oil well breaking or something happening or political tension, and suddenly the stock market crashes, gas prices go up. Information flows literally at the speed of light. Virtually anyone can communicate his or her perspective. And like Luther and the printing press, or Winston Churchill with the radio and his addresses during World War II, or if you can even, if you've seen this video, it's really the debates between Nixon and John F. Kennedy and the power of television. The tool can be an important part in enabling an impact of historic proportions. So today, I want to talk a little bit about the tool we find in our day, the internet, and what it could mean for your generation and what it could mean for mine. Well, this led me to a couple questions. First of all, who actually invented the internet? This was leaked to me via WikiLeaks, and rumor has it this gentleman did. Or secondly, how does the internet actually work? We're not quite sure. It's a real photo. But rest assured, I'm not going to be talking about firewalls or DNS servers or IP numbers or anything like that this morning. We're not going to be geeking out together. But there's no denying the growth of the web. In 1995, I was working with Apple Computer and the internet began to happen. And on that day, approximately 17 million people were using the internet. Today, that number is over 2 billion. It's incredible the amount of growth, and nothing in human history has experienced faster or wider adoption than the internet. So not only is the internet growing exponentially, but so is its impact. We have a great example of that, what we see going on in Egypt with Twitter and other types of communication that's happening even though the internet is attempting to be turned off, or the impact of WikiLeaks on our own government and information being spread instantaneously across the globe. We get a real sense of the power and the communication ability that the internet represents. A little over 3 years ago, I attended a CIO conference with Cisco Systems, and there was a story shared there by the CIO at IBM, which really illustrates this point. Home Depot, the big orange store we all know about, is the largest supplier of home supplies, either for new construction or remodeling, on the entire planet. Unfortunately, Home Depot is also, at that time, was the largest consumer of old-growth forests in the world. And so a group of concerned U.S. citizens hired a lobbyist firm and began to try to use the system in D.C. to impact policy at Home Depot. And it was largely ineffective. At the same time, though, a group of concerned citizens in South America started a blog and began to gather and share their story about the deforestation of old-growth forests in their neighborhood. And they shared it with other concerned people who shared it with other concerned people. And today, Home Depot protects more old-growth forests than any corporation in the world. How did this happen? Why did this happen? One only seems to need to look at the type of activity on the internet to try to understand the power of the internet. This slide that's behind me is a visual demonstration. We can move one, Brad. One more. Visual demonstration of what's happening on the web, where are we getting our information. Go one more. There we go. I want to show you this one. On the right axis, you see this represents 100% of all activity on the internet. And on the left shows the beginning in time. And so as we look here in 1990, we see very little activity on the internet. And as the internet grows, it really takes off. The maroon color on the bottom represents web browsing. This article was in the Wired magazine called "The Web is Dead." And what we're seeing is a rapid plummet in the amount of browser-based activity that's happening on the internet. It's an interesting graph because it starts to show a couple things are happening. One, what is happening on the web is changing dramatically. The internet that I knew when I started at Apple is radically different today than it was then. And instead of consuming what's on the web, people are starting to publish to it and use it as a communication tool. And so we only need to look to Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and it goes on, how the web is being used. So while it's different in 2011, it will be undoubtedly much different in 2025. And as Christians, we need to ask the question, how are we to use this tool for the transformative purposes of God's kingdom? Yes, I can use the web to track my beloved Lakers, but there's got to be a larger purpose. Yes, we can see that probably in this room today, we've had 7 people over the last month download copyrighted movies on our network, and we've been contacted by the company that made that movie and asked us not to do that. So I could ask you to please stop. There's a lot of things that the web can be used for. But when I think about the internet and all of its power, it feels to me like it's a God-sized tool. And who better to put the power of that tool in the hands of than you? It's a great responsibility, a great opportunity. And as we think about it, I'd like to share with you a passage from Luke 6:12-19. One of these days, Jesus went out to the mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. And when morning came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. Simon, whom he called Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called the Zealot, Judas, son of James, Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And he went down with them, and he stood on level ground. And a large crowd of disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem and from the coastal region around Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by impure spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him because power was coming from him and healing them all. I'm going to stop at verse 19. I would encourage you, it really needs to be read through verse 42. But this morning we'll focus on these verses here. I love this passage because it teaches us a number of critical principles about how things really work. You need to know that before you begin to use the tool to communicate how you understand truth, how you understand responsibility, how you see your impact in the world. You need to know how things really work. So let me share with you 4 things this passage teaches us about when we think about the internet as a tool for truth. I do want to share these ideas are actually from a bootleg video I have of Henry Nouwen giving a speech at Oberlin College in the early 90s. And so the genesis of these ideas actually come from him, but I thought they were a perfect fit for this morning. See if I can get my clicker to work. There we go. The first one, communion. Who am I in relationship with God? You know, the beginning, the middle, and the end of the power of the ministry of Jesus Christ is based in his relationship with the Father. That's the big secret. Where did Jesus get the power to do what he could do? The words to say what he could say? It became from his relationship with the Father. There's nothing unique or secretive about how Jesus went about determining what he was called to do. He was his Father's son, and as such, his life was sustained in his relationship with God. The good news is this is available to you. It's available to me. Following the life of Jesus throughout the New Testament, if you look for this, you're going to find him again and again, pausing, returning to the Father as he sought strength and encouragement and the way forward. We continually find Jesus doing this. You know, in your life, you're going to have such moments as well, where the way forward seems a bit unclear. The temptation is to plunge ahead blindly, or to stop and sit on the sidelines. And the temptation can be almost overwhelming. It's at these pivotal moments I encourage you to fellowship deeply with the Lord. Follow the example of Jesus. Like him, return to the source with all of your joys and all of your burdens. You know, it's one thing to chat with God while in line at in and out for a double-double, ketchup and onion only. But it's another thing to communicate with God in the deep quiet, to follow the example of Jesus in his relationship with God. I pray that you would seek this communion, and if you do, you will be fed. If you do, you will be empowered. If you do, you will have the strength to do the work that you're uniquely called to do. It all begins there. Secondly, who am I in community? Jesus wasn't some isolated, I'm not trusting the clicker, some isolated superhero or amazingly extra human, super duper gifted leader that everybody stood around in awe and watched. No, he was part of a community that he knew, that he loved. This is one of the things that I appreciate about Westmont, and one of the reasons I was really interested in coming to the school is the residential component of your experience here. We invite and therefore require you to live in community so that you can learn how to be around people that are like you, that are different than you, but to do so in profound community. So the passage tells us that after Jesus spent the night in prayer, he came down and he chose his community. And we list out all the disciples with whom he would live and work and serve with. Jesus invested in forming this community, and he would lead this community, but it would also be a community upon which he would depend. And that's the key about community. It's both. It's something you give to and something that you receive from. Community is, Anne Lamott jokes, that's a place that really, really knows you and yet still loves you. I've been fortunate in my life to have had profound community at a number of different times. One particular time is when I was in college. After my conversion, I did attend University of Sioux Falls and loved athletics, and a basic principle of athletics is someone wins, someone loses. That's how it works. And I took that same principle right into my faith. And what I found was that I started to feel guilty every time someone else won, succeeded. Even if it was for kingdom purposes, I didn't have within me my ability to celebrate or to be joyful for someone else's success. And I could feel it in me, and try as I might to remove that. The way that I saw the world was for someone else to win meant I had to lose. While I was in college, I had the unique opportunity to start a student-led fellowship. And before I knew what had happened, we had more people coming to the Friday night fellowship than we had attending chapel. It was a wonderful time, and I began to recruit different people to come and help as we did that ministry. And one of the people I recruited was my best friend, Paul. Paul is a remarkably gifted person, but would have a hard time organizing his way out of this room. That's not how he's put together. And so I would assign Paul to do this and Paul to do that. And for 2 years, we ministered together. And it's one of the most special memories I have. When we became seniors at the University of Sioux Falls, they pick a representative man and a representative woman. And it's the highest honor that the school bestows upon a student at graduation. And Paul was selected to receive such an honor. Well, as his best friend, I, of course, went to convocation and was there to support him. As I sat in the audience, all I could do was seethe in anger. And it only got worse. So as they were reading Paul's accomplishments, one after another were things that I had actually talked Paul into doing. He was getting credit for my stuff. And this is where community reached out and touched me and forever changed my life. As I'm sitting there, I looked up and the two of us made eye contact. And in my heart, I could feel him saying to me, "I know." And in that moment, I was healed. I went from anger to my best friend was being recognized for a life of great service to our school, and all I could feel was joy. And I've lived that way ever since. You know, the world does truly work this way, and I base my life upon it. That somehow 2 plus 2 does equal 5 in God's cosmic equation. That for others to win, I win. Community can teach that and does. Third, what is my work? So after Jesus spent the night in prayer, after he went down and formed community, then he took the disciples and they traveled down to level ground and they began to do ministry. They began to work together. And Scripture tells us that the people gathered around Jesus and they pushed up against him just to get close to his presence, because if they could touch him, they would be healed. They would be ministered to. They would be cured. Imagine the scene of these disciples, kind of newly picked for community, suddenly within all of this power and what was going on. And remember I talked about that temptation to lean back, to get on the sideline, to plunge ahead blindly. And nowhere in the passage do we find the disciples doing that. No, they stayed in the game. They stayed close to Jesus. They worked together. I imagine that this was hard, but I appreciate that they didn't move to the sidelines. They stayed close to Jesus, observing, learning, and participating as much as possible. Hildegard of Bingen wrote about work as your art. You know, when you buy a nice painting, a beautiful painting, or another piece of art, what do you do with it? Do you put it in a closet and shut the door? No, she says. You put it on a wall and you show it off. Art deserves to be displayed. And Hildegard writes that work is our art. And we see that in the passage. You know, and the Lord's been teaching me about this a lot lately as I've traveled for the school. And my job is to try to help secure resources for our mission here. And sometimes that's really fun and sometimes it's not. And you're in this uncomfortable place. And I'm there because that's what I've been called to do. That's the work that Jesus wants me to be involved in. And I feel his presence in that. So, lastly, voice. After spending the night in prayer, after forming community, after working and serving together, we have finally, in Luke 6, have some of the most profound teachings in all of the New Testament. Jesus gives voice to the nature of the kingdom of God. And it's so easy to reverse the order. Just like I did when I barged into the chaplain's office 13 years ago. When I placed speaking in front of these other essential areas, it led to all sorts of problems. And over again, I've seen in my own life and the lives of others the pain and challenges when we race past areas that God wants to use to touch and transform us. The order is ever so important. You know, only God can give the gifts of the Master. So seek the Lord for substance. You need to undergird and empower your life. But my counsel isn't to minimize any of these areas. Quite the contrary. Instead, work to keep them in perspective. Work to keep them in order. I think they happen in a very specific order in the life of Jesus. And I would suggest this morning that he offers that order to us. Go to the source. Belong to a community. Have work represent your deepest held beliefs and commitments. And when that happens, you will gain voice. A voice worth listening to, a voice worth remembering, and a voice worth following. This is how we get back to the internet. Voice is all about what the internet needs right now. Yes, it's the most powerful communication tool that's ever existed. But how does it become a tool for truth? It can't without communion. It can't without community. It can't without work. But you bring those together, you will begin to gain voice. Voice that's worth being heard. Not a lot of the things that we see on the web, there's really just racket, clanging cymbals, things that aren't memorable. And that the internet perhaps can become to us like the printing press was to Luther, that powerful tool for transformation. So Rick Iflin, who was here with you a few weeks ago, invited you to lean into a life worthy of the talents so lavishly placed upon you. And I make that same invitation. I dare you to step into the life that God has. But as you move into that, do it in the order that we find in Luke 6. I think you'll be well served by the example that we find in Christ. Well, I've got a couple minutes here, and I want to show, for us that get to serve and work here at the college, this is our work. This is what we do to further and move the kingdom forward. And I've got a great group of people in IT, and I want to show you some of the things that we're dreaming about, what we're working towards as we attempt to share the message of what God is doing through this place. Let's go over here a little bit. So one of the things we're working on is actually taking the Westmont magazine and moving it to the tablet. And here we're going to get worldwide distribution free. We're going to be able to embed video and do all these other things that'll be great. So imagine if you're coming in, we click here on a story, and there's no better story to be told right now than Adams Center for the Visual Arts and Winter Hall. And what the change that we had in the libraries. How many of you have enjoyed the change to the library? Has that been great? Fantastic. So here we have some of our art students. Here we have Winter Hall. And here we have the changes in the library. And we think this will be a great way to push the magazine out and the story of Westmont all over the world. iTunes U is something we started a year ago, and just to give you a sense of how this has really taken off, we had about 12 pieces of content when we started iTunes. We have, through the last 10 years or so, we've got all the chapels on there. We have 500 pieces of academic content, and it's growing every day. And we're seeing people from around the world. We get to, what country they're from or what city they're from. We can get an idea of who's actually coming to view content on here. And this is really, really taken off. The most popular content, of course, is this lecture here given by our beloved president, installation of Dr. Pointer. You may or may not know we have a Westmont app on the iPhone, and here it is. We're working on adapting it, and hopefully this semester you're going to see a couple things. You're going to be able to go there and inside the app, watch athletic events, and also all of the information, all of the video content and audio content in iTunes will be native inside the Westmont app. But we're not going to stop there. This is a concept that we're working on with the alumni office. We've worked on projects that matter to you right now, but when you're graduated and not here, we also want to have technology, internet tools that would be valuable to you as a graduate. And behind me, imagine if we had the Westmont app and I clicked on this Around Me button. And it brings up over here a number of pieces of information that are around me. We've all used Around Me, but what if we had Around Me content that was Westmont specific? Churches that various people that are part of the Westmont community have recommended in the city that I happen to be standing in, or the new town that I just moved to, that sort of thing. And even using the GPS function, you can get creepy and track down that roommate that owes you $2 or from when you graduated, and you'll be able to find him or her. But we want you to connect for personal and professional reasons when you leave here, to find a job that matters to you, to connect with a friend who you've shared with while you were here, a mentor in an area that you would be interested in growing in. And we hope to use this internet tool to do that. The library, we're beginning this in March and maybe even done before we get to the end of the spring semester, but we're going to be moving the whole search engine to the cloud, and a number of things that are going to happen, namely the introduction of millions of ebooks. We're going to join 11,000 libraries, and you're going to see our holdings just dramatically increase as a result of this. And it's going to be done in an interface that's very Google, Amazon-like, and I think you'll really, really like it. And then we've got Westmont Impact. Brad's going to bring up, some of you have seen this, a lot of you haven't. We're trying to use the whole social network as a way for people to to join in with Westmont, and I wanted to show you a video. And yes, there's an ask for money at the end, but this is just for your entertainment purposes this morning.
All right. I've got some good news and some bad news. What do you want to hear first? Let's go with the bad news. The world is a pretty rough place. Poverty, immorality, war, injustice, discrimination. So if you, by your lonesome self, want to make a real impact in the world, chances are you don't have much of a chance. Okay, enough of the bad news. Now for the good stuff. Right now, there are super talented, thoughtful leaders who are totally kicking the world's problems right in the face. For example, Rachel's fighting sex trafficking in Thailand. Dan is providing job opportunities for at-risk youth in San Francisco. Justin is promoting education in South Africa. Hillary's teaching on the east side in Santa Barbara. Oh, and there's more like them. Thousands of them all around the world, making an impact wherever they find themselves. So what do these leaders have in common? They're young, they're followers of Jesus, and they were all equipped to further God's kingdom by the ministry of Westmont College. Hold up. Did I just imply that Westmont College is a ministry? Sure did, and here's why. At Westmont, students receive a rigorous global education, they're discipled by professors and mentors, and they live in community with their peers. And here's the best part. They all leave Westmont. No, really, they leave. Over 300 of them each year go out into the world and tackle the bad news. Jesus said Christians are recognized by their actions or the fruit that they bear. Westmont produces graduates who are out in the world bearing juicy, delicious, refreshing fruit. Therefore, Westmont College is an incredibly effective ministry for God's kingdom. Now back to you and the bad news. Well, it's not that bad after all, because you're not alone. We're a growing movement of 1,000 people who are just like you. We want to make an impact in the world, and we're doing so by supporting the ministry of Westmont College. Join the movement with a minimum investment of $28 a month, and then go to the website to see Westmont in real time, making an impact around the world. Let's review. We support Westmont, which creates leaders who change the world for Christ. It's that easy. WestmontImpact.org.
I want to pray for you and dismiss you. Seek the Lord. Give yourself to community. Work hard. Serve the Lord well. Speak truth. May the Lord guide you and direct you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.